Alex had always felt out of place in his own family, but he had learned to mask it, pretending that the coldness of his parents and the harsh words of his older sister, Marissa, didn't affect him. He knew she was spoiled and cruel, always demanding attention, always expecting everyone to bow to her whims. Their parents rarely intervened. In fact, they seemed to encourage it, letting her treat him as if he were invisible. He had grown used to the quiet hurt of being overlooked, the sting of every joke aimed at him, the invisible wall that separated him from the warmth of family he was supposed to feel. Life at home had always been a careful navigation of silence and small victories. He didn't complain, didn't argue, because he knew that doing so would only draw more scorn from Marissa and disappointment from his parents. But everything changed the night his world shifted completely. Marissa had fallen seriously ill, and the doctors had declared that she needed a partial liver transplant. Alex's parents gathered him in the living room with a sense of urgency that immediately set him on edge. Their voices trembled, but not with worry for her health. There was calculation behind their concern. They told him, without any hesitation, that he had to donate a part of his liver. It wasn't a suggestion, not even a plea. It was framed as his duty. They insisted he owed it to the family, to his sister, to give her a chance at life. Alex felt the ground slip beneath him. It wasn't fear of the surgery that scared him. He had read the risks, understood them. What scared him was the moral weight, the twisted expectation that he should save someone who had made his life miserable for years. Marissa, lying in that hospital bed, had spent years mocking him, belittling his achievements, and cutting him off from the few friends he had managed to keep. And now, they expected him to sacrifice a part of himself for someone who had shown him nothing but cruelty. It felt unfair, impossible, and yet they spoke as if it were natural for him to comply. He sat there listening, his chest tight, mind racing. He thought about the way Marissa had laughed at him when he failed at small things, the way she whispered behind his back to their parents, and the way their parents had always let her have the last word. Now, they were asking him to trust them, to act as if none of that mattered. But something inside Alex refused to ignore the unease that gnawed at him. There was something off about the certainty in their eyes. They weren't desperate, they were expectant. Late that night, alone in his room, Alex's mind refused to rest. He thought about what would happen if he said no. He imagined their disappointment, the accusations of cruelty or selfishness. He imagined Marissa's disappointment, even her anger. He had been conditioned to fear these reactions for years, but now he realized he had an opportunity to take control of his own fate. And yet, there was more than fear driving him. A flicker of doubt, a whisper of suspicion, began to grow. Why were they so sure he would be a match? Why had they never mentioned the possibility of someone else? Something didn't sit right. Determined to get answers, Alex arranged for a private DNA compatibility test. He didn't tell anyone, not even a trusted friend. He wanted to know the truth before making any decision. The process felt like stepping into unknown territory. As he waited for the results, he replayed years of memories, searching for clues he might have missed. Every interaction, every cold glance, every unfair punishment suddenly seemed to have a new edge of meaning. The test results arrived, and Alex stared at the paper, his eyes wide, disbelief crashing over him like a wave. The results weren't what he expected at all. He had anticipated maybe being a match, maybe being compatible enough for the surgery. But the truth was far more shocking. He wasn't Marissa's biological brother. The DNA test revealed what his parents had hidden all along. He had grown up believing he shared their blood, believing that the house he lived in, the parents who raised him, the sister who tormented him, all of it was his family. But the paper in his hands shattered that illusion completely. He was not their child. Every memory, every connection, every expectation, they were built on a lie. Alex felt his stomach drop. It wasn't just betrayal. It was a fracture in the very foundation of his life. The people who had shaped his world, who had dictated his behavior, who had decided what he owed and what he deserved, they weren't connected to him in the way he thought. He was a stranger in the house he had always called home. The betrayal wasn't just emotional anymore. It was existential. He realized that his anger, his resentment, his frustration, all the feelings he had buried for years, were not only justified, they were incomplete without understanding this truth. As the reality sank in, Alex felt a rush of conflicting emotions. There was shock, disbelief, anger, and sorrow, all blending into a tight knot in his chest. But beneath it all, there was clarity. He understood that the world he had lived in, the rules he had followed, the sacrifices he had made, they were based on a lie. And the lie had been maintained because his parents had wanted something from him. Now he had power, knowledge they didn't expect him to have. He could confront them. He could expose them. He could refuse to comply with the demand to donate his liver. And in doing so, he could reclaim some measure of control over his life. Yet even in this newfound clarity, fear lingered. He feared confrontation, feared the chaos that might follow if he revealed the truth. He feared what Marissa might do if she learned he had uncovered the secret. But the fear was tempered by a sharper emotion. The desire for justice, for recognition, for acknowledgement that he had been wronged. The idea of revenge, subtle at first, began to take root. He didn't yet know how he would act on it, but he understood that his life could no longer continue as if nothing had changed. Alex's thoughts raced. He remembered the countless nights he had cried quietly, the moments of humiliation at family gatherings, the endless comparisons to Marissa, the constant pressure to be subservient, to ignore his own needs. And now, in one instant, all those years of pain gained a new context. He had been lied to, manipulated, and used. But now, the truth had given him a weapon. Knowledge. And knowledge, he realized, could be more powerful than any act of violence, more potent than any scream of anger. By the time he lay down that night, Alex's mind was already spinning with possibilities. He could leave, walk away, reclaim his independence. He could confront them, force them to face their lies. He could find a way to expose the truth publicly, shattering the facade they had built. Or he could do nothing and quietly refuse the surgery, letting his absence speak louder than any words. Each option carried consequences. Each would change his life forever. But for the first time in his life, he felt that he had choice. He wasn't a passive player in their story anymore. And as sleep finally claimed him, he realized something else. He no longer needed their approval, their love, or their recognition. He had discovered something stronger. He had discovered himself. And that discovery, sharp and undeniable, was the spark that would ignite the decisions to come. Revenge, justice, or simply freedom, it didn't matter which path he chose yet. What mattered was that the first seed of action had been planted, and nothing in the family's carefully constructed world would ever be the same again. Alex woke the next morning with a tight knot in his chest. The DNA results sat on his desk, glaring back at him like a challenge he couldn't ignore. His life, his childhood, the people he had trusted, all of it was built on a lie. He moved through the house with new eyes, noticing things he had never paid attention to before. The photographs on the walls, smiling faces that had never been entirely real, the whispered conversations of his parents that now felt like conspiracies. He realized that everything he had been told about family, loyalty, and love had been carefully curated to serve their needs. And for years, he had unknowingly played his part. Every glance from his parents now seemed like an accusation. Every word from Marissa felt sharper, heavier. They expected him to donate part of his liver, as if the past had never happened. As if the years of ridicule, isolation, and manipulation didn't matter. They didn't see him as a person. They saw him as a resource. A solution to a problem that threatened their comfort. Anger surged inside Alex, burning hotter with every thought. The betrayal wasn't just about the lie anymore. It was about control. His parents had controlled him with their words, with their love, with the illusion of family. And Marissa had learned to take advantage of that control. He spent the day replaying conversations in his mind, dissecting every interaction. He remembered moments when his parents had scolded him unfairly, when they had sided with Marissa without a second thought. He recalled family dinners where his voice was ignored, where his achievements were minimized, and Marissa's demands were always met. Suddenly it all made sense. They had never loved him as their own. They had needed him to fill a role, a convenient, obedient, unquestioning role. And now, that need had escalated into a life-or-death demand. But Alex wasn't powerless anymore. He had proof, undeniable proof, that their family ties weren't real. He had the DNA test in his pocket, a quiet weapon that could shift the balance. With it, he could challenge them, expose their lies, and assert control over the situation. The thought of using it sent shivers down his spine. It wasn't just about refusing the liver donation anymore. It was about confronting the people who had shaped his entire life under false pretenses. Still, he felt a twinge of hesitation. Revenge was tempting, but it wasn't simple. He considered the consequences, the destruction of family relationships, the possible anger and pain it could cause, and the moral weight of wielding the truth like a weapon. Could he justify it? Could he live with the fallout? He knew Marissa had been cruel, but she was human. She was sick, vulnerable, and scared. He had seen her fragile state in the hospital photos his parents had shown him. The thought of using the DNA test to hurt her felt wrong, even though every instinct screamed that he had been wronged. The conflict within him grew sharper as he sat in his room, planning, imagining, replaying scenarios. He pictured confronting his parents, holding the paper in his hands, watching their expressions change as they realized the power of the truth. He imagined Marissa's face, a mixture of confusion, fear, and maybe even regret. He imagined walking out, leaving them to scramble for solutions without his cooperation. Each option pulled him in a different direction, each path filled with consequences he couldn't ignore. Alex's thoughts turned to his parents first. He considered their justifications, the excuses they might give, the pleas they might make. Would they claim love, loyalty, or family ties? Would they insist that blood didn't matter, that upbringing defined a family? He could see their words already, rehearsed and smooth, designed to manipulate him back into submission. But he had learned their patterns. He had watched their reactions for years, and now he could anticipate every argument, every tactic, every manipulation. He realized he had a clarity he had never possessed before. For the first time, he saw them for who they truly were. Flawed, selfish and human, rather than infallible parental figures. Then there was Marissa. He had long hated her cruelty, but now he saw her differently. She was not invincible. She was ill, dependent, and vulnerable. The anger he felt toward her was mixed with pity and disbelief. He wondered what it must be like for her to lie in a hospital bed and rely on someone she had tormented her whole life. He imagined the fear in her eyes if he revealed the truth about their relationship. And he realized that revenge wasn't just about making someone else suffer, it was about control, about asserting power in a situation where he had been powerless for years. The more he thought about it, the more the tension in him grew. His mind raced, plotting, imagining, balancing risk and reward. He considered telling his parents first, confronting them privately. He thought about how he could use the DNA test as leverage, to negotiate, to assert boundaries, to finally claim the respect he had never received. Or he could bypass them altogether, going directly to Marissa with the truth, letting her confront the reality of her family and forcing a reckoning that would ripple through the household. Each option carried risk. Each would change the family dynamic forever. At the same time, Alex couldn't ignore the moral side of the equation. He knew that exposing the truth could harm people. He knew it could destroy relationships, even beyond repair. The idea of causing pain, even to those who had hurt him, weighed heavily on his mind. And yet, he also knew that silence would feel like betrayal to himself, to his sense of justice, and to the truth he had uncovered. He realized that revenge wasn't about satisfying anger. It was about reclaiming agency, about taking control of his own life for the first time. Alex began to test his emotions, imagining small steps. He would observe his parents, watch how they behaved, and gauge their reactions to subtle hints of doubt. He would measure Marissa's response to small truths, observing the cracks in her confidence and the fear beneath her bravado. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't acting out of pure anger. He was calculating, thoughtful, aware that each move would matter. The DNA test gave him power, but he knew that power was only effective if he wielded it with precision. In the hospital waiting room, Alex saw Marissa for the first time since he learned the truth. She looked smaller than he remembered, almost fragile. She was pale, her hands shaking slightly as she held a cup of water. Her expression was defiant, as always, but Alex noticed a flicker of fear in her eyes, a human vulnerability that he had never seen before. That flicker both shocked and unsettled him. It reminded him that revenge wasn't a simple path. It was complicated, emotional, and unpredictable. By the end of the day, Alex realized that he had entered a new phase of his life. He had knowledge that could shift the balance of power in his family, and he had the ability to act on it. But he also understood that the path ahead was fraught with choices, each with consequences that could affect not only him, but everyone around him. He felt the weight of every decision pressing down on his chest, the tension between justice and mercy pulling him in different directions. Yet even as the uncertainty lingered, a sense of clarity began to emerge. Alex understood that he no longer had to live as a pawn in someone else's game. He no longer had to accept the roles assigned to him by parents and a sister who had used him. He could act, decide, and assert himself. The DNA test had given him a weapon. Yes, but it had also given him freedom. The freedom to choose, to act, and to reclaim his life. By nightfall, Alex had made a quiet promise to himself. He would act, but not recklessly. He would take control, but not lose himself in anger. He would face the family he thought he knew, armed with truth and careful calculation. And as he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, he realized that the next steps would define not only his relationship with his family, but the man he was becoming. Revenge, justice, morality, they all intertwined in the choices ahead. The seed of action had been planted. The storm was gathering, and Alex knew that nothing would ever be the same. His family, his identity, and his life had shifted in ways that could not be undone. All that remained was the decision of how, when, and where he would confront the truth, and whether he could balance the hunger for justice with the responsibility of wielding it wisely. The day of the confrontation arrived with a tension that made Alex's chest tighten. The hospital room felt smaller than usual, its walls pressing in as if they were aware of the storm brewing inside him. Marissa lay in the bed, pale and fragile, her eyes half closed but alert enough to notice the subtle shift in the air when Alex entered. Their parents hovered nearby, faces taut with anxiety. hands wringing, voices hushed in quiet pleas. They expected him to cooperate, to bend once more, to sacrifice a piece of himself for their family's survival. But Alex wasn't the same boy who had quietly endured years of manipulation. He carried the DNA results in his hand, a quiet weapon that could shatter their illusions and upend the household. He stepped forward, slow and deliberate, feeling the weight of every second. Every eye in the room followed him. His parents' expressions flickered between hope and unease, the unspoken question hanging in the air. Would he comply or rebel? Marissa's defiance was there as always, but now it trembled at the edges, a fragile mask barely holding together. Alex could see the calculation in everyone's faces, the anticipation of a choice he hadn't made yet. But he didn't rush. He let the silence stretch, letting it become heavy enough to make them squirm. The room felt electric, charged with tension, every heartbeat echoing louder than the last. "I got tested," he said finally, his voice quiet but firm. It carried a weight that demanded attention. His parents stiffened. Marissa's eyes widened slightly. "And I know the truth." He unfolded the DNA results slowly, deliberately, letting the paper catch the light. It wasn't just a sheet of facts, it was proof, undeniable and piercing. He laid it on the bedside table, in front of Marissa, in front of his parents, letting them absorb the words. He watched their reactions carefully. His mother gasped, hand flying to her mouth. His father froze, eyes wide and incredulous. Marissa's face, always so confident, now flickered with uncertainty, confusion, and perhaps fear. Alex could feel the power shift subtly in the room, the balance moving from them to him, from control to truth. "I'm not your biological son," he said, his voice steady, cutting through the tension. "You lied to me my whole life. You made me believe I belonged here, that I owed everything to you, that I had to obey your rules. And now, you want me to risk my life for someone I am not even related to." The silence that followed was deafening. His parents opened their mouths, closed them again. Words failed them, or perhaps they knew that any justification would crumble under the weight of the truth. Marissa's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes darting between Alex and their parents, searching for guidance, for some foothold in the shifting ground beneath her. But there was none. Alex felt the anger inside him flare, but he also felt something else. Clarity. He could see, with a sharpness he had never known before, the years of manipulation, of control, of emotional abuse. Everything was laid bare now. He realized that revenge didn't have to be dramatic or cruel. It didn't have to involve destruction or public humiliation. Sometimes the most powerful revenge was asserting one's own power, reclaiming one's life and refusing to be a pawn any longer. His parents finally spoke, voices trembling. "Alex, you have to understand," his mother said. "Family isn't about blood. You've been ours since the day you were born." Alex shook his head slowly. "That's where you're wrong. You decided who I was supposed to be, who I had to obey, what I owed you. But you never loved me as I deserved. You needed me to serve your comfort. That's not love. That's manipulation." Marissa finally spoke, her voice quieter than he expected. "Alex, I didn't know." Her words trailed off, unconvincing even to herself. She had relied on the belief that he would comply, that he would give in. But now she saw that he wasn't the child she had controlled. He was something else entirely, someone who could stand up to her, someone who had finally claimed power over his own life. Alex felt a surge of emotion. He could have lashed out, exposed their lies to the world, humiliated them for every year of manipulation. But he realized that wouldn't satisfy him. True satisfaction didn't come from hurting them. It came from walking away. leaving them to face the consequences of their actions while he reclaimed his life. The idea of revenge shifted in his mind, no longer about punishment, but about liberation. "I'm not donating," he said finally, his voice calm but unyielding. "Not because I want to hurt anyone, but because I need to save myself. Walking away is my choice. It's the only thing that makes sense for me now." Shock rippled across their faces. His mother's hands fell to her sides. His father's jaw tightened. Marissa blinked, confusion giving way to a glimmer of realization. Alex saw the moment in their eyes when they understood. He was no longer theirs to control. He was independent, free, and unafraid to act on his own judgment. He stepped back, letting the silence sink in. The tension in the room was palpable, but Alex felt lighter than he had in years. Every moment of ridicule, every slight, every lie, every demand they had ever placed on him had been rendered powerless. He had not sought vengeance in the traditional sense, but in reclaiming himself, he had achieved something far stronger: freedom from their control. For a few moments, no one spoke. Then his mother's voice trembled. "Alex, we." Words failed her again. His father said nothing. Marissa looked at him with a mixture of fear, frustration, and perhaps understanding. Alex didn't answer. He didn't need to. The decision had been made. He walked out of the hospital room slowly, deliberately, each step a declaration of autonomy. With every step, he felt the years of manipulation fall away. He realized that revenge wasn't always about causing suffering. Sometimes it was about reclaiming agency, drawing a line, and refusing to participate in a system that had treated him unfairly. The world outside the hospital doors felt vast, alive, and full of possibility. For the first time in his life, he was fully in control of his own story. As he stepped into the sunlight, the weight of the past began to lift. He thought about what had brought him to this point. Years of small betrayals, of cruel words, of overlooked pain. And yet, the DNA test, the revelation, had given him clarity. He could leave behind the lies, the manipulation, and the toxic expectations. He could build a life on his own terms. Alex didn't feel relief immediately. There was still pain, lingering questions, and the sense of loss that came with leaving a family behind. But beneath that, there was a fierce, quiet satisfaction. He had chosen himself over the people who had used him. He had faced the moral dilemmas of revenge, considered the options, and made a choice that aligned with his own values. And in doing so, he had reclaimed his power. As he walked through the city streets, Alex realized something profound. Revenge often seems satisfying in fantasy, filled with dramatic confrontations and dramatic payback. But the true power of justice lies in the choices we make for ourselves. Walking away, refusing to participate in harm, and asserting control over one's own life. That was a deeper, more enduring form of victory. By the time he reached his small new apartment, Alex felt a sense of quiet triumph. He had not destroyed anyone, but he had dismantled the power they held over him. He could breathe, think, and live without their manipulation pressing down on him. Every decision he had made had been deliberate, considered, and driven by a desire to reclaim himself rather than punish others. Sitting by the window, looking at the city lights, he reflected on the journey. The anger and resentment he had carried were still there, that they no longer controlled him. He understood that revenge, in the traditional sense, was a fleeting satisfaction. True fulfillment came from freedom, from integrity, from acting in alignment with one's own values. And for Alex, that was enough. He smiled faintly, not because he had won over anyone else, but because he had won over himself. The storm had passed. The confrontation was over. And for the first time in his life, he felt unshackled, whole, and ready to live on his own terms.